Burnout is a real problem for mothers these days. Expectations are at an all-time high, and there is so much on our plates, both in the realm of mothering and in other areas of our life, such as relationships and work. Today, we are joined by mindset and wellness coach, licensed therapist, and mom of two, Lynsey Retzlaff, to explore how burnout impacts mothers and the role that emotional intelligence plays in combating burnout and redefining the motherhood experience. Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast, where we discuss all things identity, self-compassion, and fulfillment within and beyond motherhood. I'm Emily Rose Hardy, a mindset and self-love coach for moms. I am a firm believer that to be able to take care of our children, we must take care of ourselves first. This is not a parenting podcast. No, this is a podcast where we will challenge the societal expectations of what it means to be a mom, demystify the perfect mom myth, and learn to love ourselves. You are worthy, mama. Let's do this. Hello, and welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. Today, we are joined by Lynsey Retzlaff, a licensed therapist and working mom coach. And we are going to be talking about developing emotional intelligence and really the impacts of that on life and motherhood. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation, in part because Lynsey and I both kind of share this belief that the traditional ways of mothering are no longer really serving moms. And we both consider that deeply in the work that we do and, supporting moms. And so I really have the feeling that this conversation is not only going to be helpful, but it's also going to be something that will help you just kind of feel seen in your experiences. So Lynsey, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Emily. I'm really excited. So I'm my background is in mental health as a therapist. So I've been doing that for over 10 years now. And a lot of my work in a residential trauma unit as a therapist kind of helped catapult me into doing the stuff with working moms, because I was working with some clients there, and the treatment around trauma has to do with changing belief systems. A lot of times these really horrific traumas cause these distorted beliefs about people, and it kind of hit me like, wow, like all the personal work I've done on myself, and I see these belief systems showing up in other clients. It made me really realize how prevalent it is. So that kind of is what got me started with doing the coaching with working moms, because that was a hard transition for me personally. So just trying to apply my mental health background with, helping kind of an underserved population, in my opinion.
Yep, I am right there with you. I think it's so important to consider how mental health plays a role in all of these things. I think we're starting to have more conversations about mental health in mothers, but really understanding it's not just, okay, certain things make life hard. There can be real impacts on mental health. And so I love that you're taking all of that and supporting moms in a way that really considers all the pieces. Mm-hmm. We are going to be digging into emotional intelligence and navigating motherhood and burnout in this episode. But before we do, I think it's really important to kind of talk about what expectations are out there and kind of lay the foundation of what it looks like for working moms. So societally, and kind of in those expectations and narratives that exist of moms and how moms are expected to juggle it all, what is your take on that? What is your take on just what exists?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much that we could talk about, right? But there's these societal beliefs and kind of these gender norms that come up for women as well. And I know for me personally, the first time I experienced that as a mom was when I was a new mom on maternity leave. And I always had it in my head that I would be a stay-at-home mom. And I think that's just solely because my mom stayed home with my sister and I. And halfway through maternity leave, I was no longer enjoying it the same way. I was really longing for adult conversation. I always kind of joke like, Bubble Guppies wasn't doing it for me anymore. And I was really excited to go back to work. But right alongside that thought was a feeling of guilt. Like, oh my gosh, I can't go back to work because that's not what a good mom's supposed to do. She should want to stay home. And that's my point, societal norms, right? Like there's so many different messages that are fed to us on a day-to-day basis. But then at the same on the other side of the coin, we hear, yeah, you go be an independent woman and you go work as a mom. Good for you. But make sure you don't stay out there too long because you need to be back with your kids. Don't abandon your kids, right? Like there's conflicting messages all the time as mothers and as women. Then there's, we can get into all the different, like the mental load that women talk about, right? And just how the gender norms are just different and they're more traditional. Like I think back to like, the 50s, the mom stayed at home and she cooked and she did all these homemade meals and the house was supposed to be perfect. And it is just unrealistic. There are more women mothers in the workplace now than ever before, yet we're still expected to do all of these unrealistic things.
Yeah, you laid that out so succinctly, just how, I mean, and it's not something we can really talk about super succinctly because it's all these different things, but you painted such a clear picture of the ways in which we can't meet the expectations because there's so many differing contradicting expectations, and there's the things that we want, but the things we feel guilty about. And we don't know if that's because it's not what we actually want or because it's society and all these different pieces to it. And that just adds to the mental load that is already so expansive, right? There's the things we're expected to do as a mom. And then there's the things we're expected to do if you work out of the home or in the home, but if you do paid work, there's so much that goes along with that piece of it and how you're expected to juggle and manage that with the motherhood side of things. And it's not set up to allow us to do that. And so there's kind of the balance of like kind of knowing there's things you can do to maybe make it better for yourself, but also that we're dealing with kind of the systematic issues that you can't necessarily fix. What, like, when you think about that, what comes up for you?
My first thought is just how depressing that can feel, how stuck that can make people feel. And I hope that, as we continue our conversation, the people listening will just be able to have more of a starting place and a feeling of hope that, yeah, there's these big things that we can't necessarily change individually, but that doesn't mean that you can't change your life.
Yeah.
And I think collectively as a whole, we can make big change, but thinking that you can just do that independently can lead to a lot of increased burnout and just, low mood.
Yeah, totally. No, I like the way of thinking of that, of like, you actually can make a difference in your life, like a real, real difference. We have a lot more choice than sometimes we are led to believe. And then accepting that, like, there might be things that we can't just fight and win.
Yeah.
And that also is important to acknowledge that, like, you can be part of the change and we can work to change the way things are, but we have to like manage expectations with that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You have to be very clear on what's in your control. And then there, you're also kind of talking about acceptance there, like just the acceptance of, okay, well, maybe I wish I could do more, but is that even realistic?
Yeah. So we are going to kind of like get back to this in the conversation, but one of the things that I want to really focus on is emotional intelligence. Like that is a huge piece of the work that you do. And I'm hoping you can just kind of give us a rundown, like, what is emotional intelligence? What's that referring to?
Yeah. So you can think of emotional intelligence as a way to like understand, respond to emotions of yourself and others. So it's being aware of kind of how your words and actions affect yourself and other people. There's pillars to that. So to kind of to break it down, this is what makes up emotional intelligence. But one is the ability for self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and then relationship management. So self-awareness is the ability to understand and acknowledge what's going on internally. What are your belief systems? What are these triggers that you tend to have? What are these emotions that come up? Where do they come from? I think this is something people have always kind of struggled with, but it's worse in society today because we have all these distractions. Our phone is constantly going off. We have all these, these busy schedules. And because of all the distractions, we don't really stop in and fully be present with ourselves. So it's hard to be aware of these belief systems. And I see that so much with the clients that I work with, either in therapy or in coaching. It's like one of the biggest things they need is assistance in getting below that surface. For an example, one thing that I hear a lot, and I've said myself through my own personal growth, is I don't have enough time. Like, I don't, when are you supposed to, implement all this stuff? But if you go deeper than that, there's usually a fear underneath it. Like, I might fail, or I'm not good enough for this. There's all these deep beliefs that we hold about ourselves. And that's, why that trauma unit I talked about had such a big impact in just my career and personal life, is until we're able to identify those belief systems and kind of redefine them, rewrite them, it's really hard for people to change and move forward. So self-awareness gives you that ability to recognize those things. Self-management is kind of like, okay, now that we know this stuff, how do we regulate all of this? So many people struggle with guilt because they yell at their kids when they're upset or overstimulated or triggered, right? And it's like, oh, why did I do that? And the regulation piece is so important, not just individually, but you're also modeling to your kids these different patterns. So if you tend to give the cold shoulder when you're upset, or if you yell and are reactive that way, that's kind of what, kids are learning. So I think it's the number one thing people can do is work on themselves first before even tackling some kind of parenting, technique or something, because we're just going to keep throwing our own barriers up in front of those things. So self-management. The social awareness is the ability to kind of read the room. If you're not aware of how you're showing up or how you can read others, that's going to affect your relationships as well. So like an example would be if you found out that you were just promoted. If you walked into a room to share this excitement with your colleagues and you didn't notice that they seemed a little somber, maybe because they just found out bad news about another coworker's, I don't know, mother passing away. If you just walked in there and were like, hey, guess what? I got this promotion. One, you're not going to get the response that you're really looking for. But two, people are going to be like, what the heck? Like, she's not here consoling us. So it can kind of start to break down relationships as well. So social awareness is really important. Taking that to an even bigger, like kind of outside of the home or work, this is where we get into conversations about racism and sexism. Are you able to notice what is causing other people to be uncomfortable? And can you then regulate yourself so that you can show up and provide, a safe environment for these people? And then the last pillar would be relationship management. So are you able to manage and show up in relationships, even despite some of these really hard feelings coming up, resentment towards your partner or whatever it might be? And empathy is a really big piece of that.
It's really like having it broken down like that. I'm just making all these ties to
Mm-hmm.
motherhood.
Yep.
And particularly with that piece of self-awareness versus self-management, that's something that personally for me with parenting, like the actual act of parenting, my awareness has increased. That's been part of my journey of becoming a mother and like learning about myself and learning, just how I interact with the world and what I want, what I value, what I believe. And that's so much of what I support moms to do. It's a lot of the conversations we have. But there's been, raising kids and raising kids with their own unique personalities and their unique needs and all these things. There's things where it's like, I've never had to manage myself in the way that I do parenting, and just the difference between those two things and those two skills. It's really like there's a lot to it.
There's a
And
lot
then
to it.
understanding like the societal context and like how others are contributing to those beliefs and the different things and all the pieces. It's like there's a lot to like being a human with emotions. And I think for so many people, those things of like being able to like feel the nuance in a room, I think for a lot of people, the empathy is something that not just they weren't taught, but also like taught to kind of ignore for themselves and for others. And so there's like so much to it that it's broken down in such like kind of simple way. And it's like, there's so much to each piece of that. I just think it's really interesting to just think about what's coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had mentioned like, how that relates to mothers. And if we don't take intentional time, and I'm using that word intentionally, is because it causes us to be more prone to burnout because there's, like we said, there's so much go, go, go all the time. You have to remember all these million different things. And so if you can take time to get really clear on what your values are, and I don't just mean like, yeah, family's important to me, but like deeper than that. What about family? Like, how do you want to show up in your family, in that life domain, if that's important to you? You can only really know that through self-awareness, and then this impacts our parenting, as we're talking about. It impacts how we lead teams, how we show up with coworkers. And for, as we talked about before with the bigger picture, if you want to challenge these societal norms, not just for parents, but, racism and ageism and all that kind of stuff, that requires that social awareness. And then awareness of your own belief systems. Do you have any belief systems that are negatively affecting that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's something that for so many of us, we do have these biases and like are completely unaware.
Yep.
But we grow up in a society that does. And so we have that. And like it can be a challenge to become aware of those things. I think for people who are actively working intentionally on becoming more self-aware, they continue their whole life to uncover things because it's, again, we're complex.
Exactly. Yeah. Things come up, new trauma happens or adverse experiences or financial difficulties or whatever it might be. And we have to constantly be aware of how it's affecting us, how we're showing up so that we can evaluate that and then pivot, if needed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we're looking specifically at burnout or, approaching burnout, because I know burnout is not every mom is going to get to a place of burnout, but for most moms, I would say, I would guess for most moms, there's points where they get close to that just because of all the pressures. What is happening there? What do you see primarily happening for moms to kind of reach that point of like approaching burnout or of true burnout?
Yeah. So, I guess if we start by even understanding what burnout is, I think there's a continuum to it.
Okay.
There's, like the mild, moderate, severe. So it looks different depending on how burnt out you are. More severe cases tend to show where people are, there's a lot more cynicism showing up in that, like nothing's going to ever change. That kind of mentality shows up more in severe. But even on lower levels, it's a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that results from long periods of chronic stress. So maybe that just means you're not as engaged in your family or work life. Because burnout used to be just kind of a work term, like we're burned out at work. But we're realizing it shows up in a lot of other areas too. So at home, are you kind of just more disengaged? Is your mood more down? Those kinds of things. So what leads to it? We hear about that term mental load all the time. Just that mental go, go, go. You have to juggle all of these things. What am I going to have for dinner this week? And do I have the ingredients? Oh, no, we can't have that tonight because so-and-so has soccer, right? Just the mental load. Doing that over and over and not getting a reprieve or having help can lead to feeling burned out. So I think, the things that lead up to that would be that, for one, the ability to, or I should say the lack of the ability to set boundaries or be assertive. And that can even come from a variety of reasons, right? Like if you used to be assertive, but you were told you were being ridiculous or had even just a negative response back, what are you learning in that? You're learning, oh, I guess my needs don't matter. And then people
Mm-hmm.
tend to shut down. So this is that, that self-awareness piece. And then how does that affect your life today? So setting boundaries is a huge one, and one that moms have a really hard time with. Either it's like, well, I feel like I have to be super mom and I have to do all of these things, and I can't just buy the cookies for the bake sale. I have to bake them from scratch. Like, no, there's nothing wrong with buying them or even saying no to the bake sale. You know what I mean? So I think those are definite common pieces, even like
Yeah.
perfectionism. Mm-hmm.
It's so many little pieces. I even like what came to my mind, something that I have a 5-year-old and he just started kindergarten this year. And I used to be an elementary school teacher and left that career. But, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get involved in the school, right? Maybe I'll get involved in the PTA or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent something about, who is on the PTA, and it was all women. And I honestly, right then and there, was like, I can't do this. I can't contribute to that. It just doesn't feel good to me
Yeah.
to put myself in that position when my husband's not going to. And he has no, like, it's not like I would expect
Yes.
him to. He has no care about that. Like,
Right.
that's not important to him. And it's not important to me that that's important to him. But even that, like that decision, and that's something I'm not doing, there's still the like mental load of like am I like, is that a weird reason to make that choice? Is that like
Yeah.
it's not just the decision, it's everything that comes along with that. And every time I question that choice or like whatever, because it wasn't something I put a lot of thought into, and honestly wasn't something I really like cared that much to begin with. But it's wild how with little tiny decisions, even there can be so much guilt and so much like questioning. And I think we see that with even more stress, more pressure in a lot of decisions we're making about our children or
Yes.
about like how we're showing up as a professional or whatever it is, right? And it's just a lot. Like there's a lot that we are all managing and dealing with, and we don't always name it. We don't always recognize the load, like the true load that it is putting on us. And then the way you explain burnout and how it comes from this place of chronic stress,
Mm-hmm.
it's like how many moms are out there living with very chronic, deep stress? I think that's kind of the expectation in a sense.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
It's
And
really, it's rough.
yeah. And like to your point earlier, it's not like these are conversations or even necessarily skills that a lot of people learn.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really kind of just set up to just survive and
Mm-hmm.
not thrive.
And then it's like there's something wrong with you because you're
Yep,
not showing up more engaged and you're not like you need a nap and all these things that then can
exactly.
contribute to like the feeling poorly. And if you lack that self-awareness to see the bigger picture, because self-awareness often has to do with the awareness of how we fit into the bigger picture.
Yeah,
It just like it's a cycle. It's like a cycle that just snowballs and gets bigger and bigger. And it's like no wonder burnout is such a massive problem for moms.
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we can get into kind of how emotional intelligence fits into that. What is the kind of connection between developing the emotional intelligence and avoiding burnout, combating burnout, whatever that looks like?
Yeah. So to develop higher emotional intelligence or EQ, one of the best things you can do is mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness helps break away all those distractions and bring you back to the present, where you can have access to what are my thoughts? What am I feeling in this moment? So, like, that would be huge because that self-awareness piece also gives us a roadmap to our values.
Yeah.
And like we said, values, it's not like a goal. Like a goal, you complete a goal and you're done with it. Values are this constant roadmap to your life. This is what makes people feel in alignment. Everybody talks about work-life balance, but no one hardly ever stops and really does the deep work to figure out, well, what would make my life aligned?
Mm-hmm.
So that self-awareness piece, that mindfulness piece allows you to do that. I think another big piece that's helpful for anyone, but especially working moms or moms in general, is the empathy piece.
Yeah.
When we get burned out, we can lose empathy for people. And I want to just challenge the idea of empathy. I think in our society, we think of empathy more in its natural form, which is if you see, I don't know, if you're watching the Olympics or something and an athlete gets hurt, when they kind of go and grab their knee in pain, what do? We instinctively grab our knee in pain, like, oh, I can feel that. We even make that face that we're both doing right now. Um, and that's natural empathy. I
Yeah.
can have natural empathy for that person because I know what it's like to feel that specific pain. But we don't really work on intentional empathy. And intentional empathy is where we have to realize we're not going to have the feeling of being empathetic, but we can increase the empathy through our understanding. And that's kind of in that definition of emotional intelligence again. It's being aware and understanding. So, understanding, you can learn through your experience. Like if you said you were a kindergarten teacher, I've never been a kindergarten teacher, and I'm sure there's worse stressors in your job.
Oh, yes.
So for me to build empathy for you in that, I could ask questions about it. Like, oh, tell me more about that experience, or what was it like working with the parents? Or the more questions I ask, and I am asking from a place of wanting to know and understand, I'm growing intentional empathy, which makes me feel more connected to you. So now we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting into that relationship management. And so I think that that is so important. It's one that I think about daily. Am I kind of just wanting this feeling of empathy to be there, or am I really asking questions to be intentional with it? That helps me with my kids so much. Because how many times when your kid has a tantrum or something, it's triggering. It's over, there's overstimulation. They're frustrated because you're trying to get out the door or whatever it might be. And we just react. Just put
Mm-hmm.
your shoes on. Come on, can you just put your shoes on? Right. And the kid pulls away more because now they're experiencing the tone that we have. and they don't like it and they're pulling away because they don't feel connected. But what would happen if you were able to regulate, pause, and then ask questions with intentional empathy? Hey, how are you feeling right now? Maybe the kid doesn't want to go to school, right? This just happened with one of my kids this morning. He didn't want to go to school. And my husband and I had to kind of look at each other and go, okay, we need to stop what we're doing. We're doing too much of the tone, the forcing him into this, and try to connect. So then we just started asking questions. He said he was tired. He didn't want to go to school. You could see his body just kind of relax a little bit because we were connecting with him. There was the empathy that was there for both of us. So I feel like emotional intelligence helps so much because if we can improve our relationships, if we can restore our inner peace, you know, challenge these mindsets and these belief systems, all of that leads to a more purposeful and fulfilled life and less burnout.
Yeah. It's so huge. Like it's this thing we can do for ourselves and to, I mean, bringing the awareness to the values and what's important to you and like how you exist in the world is like such a huge piece of it, right? It's such a huge piece of then doing the things in alignment, living in alignment, which is the opposite of living in this burnout track of like
Yep.
doing things that are really like grinding you down.
Yep.
But then there's like the other piece of it of like when we can develop the other parts of emotional intelligence and the empathy, that also contributes to like our well-being and the connection because we all need that sense of community. We all need that sense of feeling like connected to one another, and hearing and seeing someone else contributes to that, right? It's not just others recognizing us, but then the impacts beyond us as individuals to like how that impacts others. You explained with kids, like how it can have this really clear impact on our kids, but it also is like when we can understand that what other mothers are going through or what other, whatever it is, other people just in their own little bubbles are going through because we are choosing to ask the questions, choosing to really think about like what might be happening and being really intentional about that, it can have a positive impact on those people as individuals and also on how then we kind of navigate the world and like the people who make up the systems and the different things that like are contributing to not just our own burnout, but to kind of this society of burnout culture that I think exists so much. And it's like, it really does change the world when you can develop that empathy. Like it's wild how not much of an exaggeration that is, right?
Yeah. 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 And, just to give another example to your point, it's not just with kids, it's with coworkers, leaders who are managing teams. It's like the ability to empathize, understand with your coworkers, your colleagues, and then validate that experience.
Yeah.
All of that's what creates psychological safety, which is like the ability to feel like you can be vulnerable emotionally. And we all know burnout is so big right now, even in careers. There's so many people leaving. And I think the answer to retain employees is treating them more human, getting to understand their situation a little bit better. And no, you're not trying to be a therapist. You're not their therapist, but this is just basic human connection that makes people feel supported and validated.
Yeah, it's really like I'm just seeing so many connections in my mind right now because I talk about this so much in the realm of motherhood and how we are human. We can't expect to be perfect. We can't really allow others to expect us to be perfect, all these things, and how that connects to society as a whole. And I think a lot about how like the world and like our safety as individuals has changed over however many years, right? Like I think back like 200 years. I wasn't around then, but I know antibiotics didn't exist. So like we think about just things like that or like, having access to clean water. Like places for our waste to go, whatever, like these weird things we can think about with safety. And our world has transformed so much where, for the most part, we have access to shelter, clean water, food, medical treatment, whatever, right? There's things, but we think about that and how really it's like we're in a place where we can be safe for the most part, right? There's, again, so many factors to that. But how it's almost like we've lost in our society this sense of humanity and understanding that we are only human. We're not perfect robots. And so are the people we interact with. And I think we see that in how, like, the expectations of mothers, we see that of the expectations of employees and leaders and of everybody. Like, it's really, we've kind of lost that, even though we are in a place of a lot more safety. And so it's like, then, okay, how can we kind of like create that psychological safety? I mean, that really is, it's, you saying that, it's like a light bulb. It's like, yeah, that's really such a big piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. You originally asked, like, how do you develop EQ? And one piece that you're kind of highlighting is for the social awareness. No one is, like you said, no one expects you to know everything, right? Yeah. But are you intentionally going out there and trying to learn? That's kind of the big thing. So, if you're working in companies or a career that has diversity, if you don't know something, it's your job to go figure that out. And one of the best things you can do is purposely try to surround yourself with people who don't look like you, who don't have the same viewpoints, because even if we think about social media, we're constantly being fed the same things that we're clicking on that are of interest to us. So no wonder we don't know what it's like to, be poor or whatever it might be, experience racism or whatever, because we're not surrounding ourselves with that. So, surrounding yourself with these different viewpoints helps you increase that social awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so like important to the human experience, like to each of our own experiences and like becoming unnumb to all of it.
Yeah.
This conversation is, like I said, it was going to be helpful and also like just really like impactful, and
we could talk all day.
Yeah, it's so good. So good. I feel like my mind has been expanded, and I hope anyone listening, like, that feels similar, because wow. Something that I really love asking towards the end of these conversations, I'm like all about normalizing self-care for moms. I think that it's something that is super important to be caring for ourselves, obviously, and making sure our needs are met. However, it can also be something that moms feel weird about or guilty about and things like that. So I'm all about normalizing it. And I would love to ask you how you take care of yourself, and if you have any tips for moms to just like make sure they're taking care of themselves on a regular basis.
Yeah. I'm more introverted and my husband's the opposite. So I've had to tell him the importance of my nighttime routine. I will go in the bathroom. I like doing makeup and stuff like that. So of course you got to take it off. So my nighttime routine, I shut the door and I lock it. There's something about locking it where I just feel like, okay, no interruptions, even if there are a couple knocks on the door, right? And I will either put on a podcast, I'll put on music. Sometimes it'll just be quiet. I might steam my face, take all the makeup off. It's not just skincare. It's like a self-care ritual. And it just helps me kind of quiet down at the end of the day. That's a huge one for me. The other thing that is very helpful is my husband and I will spend one day on the weekend and we'll get really clear on what our schedule looks like for the next, usually week, but sometimes 2 weeks. Once a month, we'll kind of go out and schedule like, okay, I have this coming up in the next 2 months. That helps because it eliminates putting all of this stuff and juggling it in our minds, but it also allows me to schedule and kind of audit. What's my month or week look like? Ooh, there's a lot of work stuff in here. I need to do more family stuff, or I need to do more self-care stuff, or ooh, I haven't seen my friend in a month. Okay, I got to get on the phone and schedule something. So it's a way to balance all of that. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that is being proactive. It would be so easy for us just not to sit down and do that, but scheduling that time helps us in the long run as well. So then you asked about, what can other working moms do? So I would say being able, if you have some kind of belief system that says, I don't have time for self-care, or I'm not going to be supported in it, or whatever it is, make sure you utilize some of those, mindfulness techniques so that you can identify where that's coming from, but also change your mindset around self-care. It's not a luxury. It's just not. If you don't do self-care and do things that fill your cup, give you energy as opposed to take it away, you are more likely to be burned out. So it's not a luxury, it's a non-negotiable. So identifying what your non-negotiables are can be really helpful.
That piece there about like how if we're not kind of bringing the energy back, right? It's like a battery. It's like you can only spend so much energy until you are burned out. Like that's just how it works. The battery will die. It's not going to work. You can't use it anymore. And it's like that piece of self-care being something that gives you the fuel that you need to like do the things in your life that you want to do. And if you are running on zero, it's not good for you. It's not good for anybody else. And I think that mindset piece there is huge. Like really, again, it's the normalizing taking care of yourself, the normalizing that being such a priority in your life. Like it has to be at the top of the list. It has to be something that happens because you can't do anything else without your needs, like those, at least those basic needs, but really the things that like, again, fill your cup, make it so that you can show up in the world. You can't do anything if that's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even after everything that we said, if that's still something that you're struggling with, like we said at the beginning, all of this feels like a lot, but it's not your job to know that. You reach out to people who understand this or have done this before, because they can show you the way. It's going to save you a lot of time and make the whole process easier. The point being, even if you feel stuck, if you want to change, you can change. You can make changes to improve your life.
Yeah, it's really like an important note there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so much of what you've talked about too in this episode kind of contributes to that, right? Like we can continue showing up for ourselves and learning about ourselves and doing differently, doing better
Absolutely.
for ourselves.
Yeah.
This conversation has been so good. Lynsey, can you let listeners know just where to find you and if there's anything to keep an eye out for?
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out the most, but I am on Facebook. I have a private Facebook group too. If you're interested in that, you can go to my website, Lynsey Retzlaff. I'm sure you'll spell that in your show notes because it's kind of a mouthful. Lynsey spelled weird, but lynseyretzlaff.com. You can grab my freebie. It's called the Unapologetic Value Roadmap. If that values conversation is something that seemed valuable to you, you can grab that and you'll get access to the private Facebook group as well. But yeah, reach out to me, say hi.
Amazing. Love it too. And yeah, I will definitely have everything linked to no names,
Yeah.
Just hearing it might not be something you can spell, but we'll have it in there. But yeah, thank you so much for being here for this conversation and really good one.
Good. I'm glad you found value out of it. And thanks for the invite, Emily. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for everyone tuning in. I hope you found this conversation just as amazing as I did. You are worthy, Mama.